further ado, Deborah, the digital voice has spoken. Welcome. It's a privilege to have you here.
Oh, listen, this is one big collective effort. That's all I can say. And you know, people on this call have been at this work a lot longer than I have. But we seem to have found a little bit of a niche here in terms of the whole COP processes. So Russell just said to talk, I mean, he said for maybe up to 20 minutes, which seems like an awful long time, but I've got some notes here and I'll just talk through. It was sort of a catch up on COP and what we feel has come out from it. And I mean, really, I think the first overarching thing to say is that in a very short space of time, really, between the Glasgow COP and now, these three meetings, Glasgow, Sharm el-Sheikh and Dubai, I think collectively we've made huge progress. And these gatherings, as much as those who are boycotting gatherings for whatever the reason, you know, Greta saying we shouldn't be going, demand climate justice, boycotted Dubai COP on the grounds of human rights. I mean, they're absolutely right. I can see why the COP is a huge problem for many people. I would just say on this issue, because it is a relatively new issue, and I think very hard before I get on a plane and spend money on these kinds of things, it's absolutely worth it. We are definitely making progress. So that's really I think the first thing I want to say about COP and the issues that people have with COP and why we go. So specifically to this COP, just to compare to last year, which was my first COP, which was Sharm el-Sheikh. At COP in Sharm el-Sheikh, there were two events on military emissions. We weren't even really talking about military spending at that first COP. And I think Sharm el-Sheikh was the first official side event hosted by a government on military emissions. That was Ukraine, and that was the event that we were part of. Two events at Sharm el-Sheikh. Because of Ukraine, we did capture an awful lot of media on the topic of military emissions inside that COP space. And the Ukraine government and pavilion also, they were at a climate change conference. So their key, the key thrust of what Ukraine was all about, both on their pavilion and at the official side event, was Russia, emissions fallout, reparation, how do we rebuild green? This year, in Dubai, there were 8 or 9 events specifically addressing military emissions and military spending. And there were others around that were addressing, of course, conflict and climate change. So the kind of the broader issues concerning the fallout of conflict and how that impacts on climate change. Refugees, movements of people, that kind of thing. But specifically on military spending and military emissions, there were 8 or 9 events, which now, and I want to say, because I think the context is really important in all of this, for Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt and Ukraine, and the event that we had there, it was the conflict in Ukraine that brought the media into the room. And so I would say that everybody that's been working on this, you know, Stuart's been working on this forever. Tamara, Colin, you know, her work for IPB in 2014, you know, some outstanding people doing very early work on that. And then more of us sort of piled in behind that, you could say. We were all collectively ready to step into that space that Russia's invasion of Ukraine created in terms of people seeing emissions, seeing it kind of firsthand in a way that didn't happen for Iraq, hasn't happened for Yemen, Afghanistan, all of these other conflicts where clearly you can see the climate fallout. You have heavy weaponry involved. So you can see the impact on the climate, over and above impact on people and environment. So Ukraine was that kind of open door, and these COP meetings are really important because everybody is there. The government's there, UNs are there, the UN are there, the activists are there, the media is there. This year it was Gaza, and clearly, of course, Gaza was sort of everywhere around COP, and was a very strong focal point for activists at COP, obviously. And although the 8 or 9 events that were happening at COP were all programmed before October 7, obviously, because all of that gets signed off over the sort of summer, autumn, August, September, which is interesting in itself. It meant that those of us that were speaking to military missions on these official side events, military missions and military spending, we were speaking to it in a way that was now making absolute sense for activists, climate activists in the room and at COP. So I would say these 2 conflicts, Ukraine and Gaza, have been the events that have met, the terrible events that have met those of us that have been working on military missions and military spending. So therefore, many more people have ears to hear what we're saying. So the 3 events, so to speak specifically to the events that we were involved with, we had an event with Wilf and Drexel University, who were people that I had met at Sharm el-Sheikh, and who had never really thought about military emissions in terms of a particular woman I met there, Christy Kelly, who works on UN, gender and violence, climate, UN processes. She just, like a lot of people at these events, they just have their eyes open and they're hearing it for the first time. She worked with Wilf and ourselves, and we got an official side event, which came fairly early on in COP. And that was looking at military missions, military spending. And for me, it was really important that this COP, we, at least from where we were coming from, we could make our priority message, and this is our mantra, and I'm hearing it get picked up now, and that's good. And that is this positive correlation between military emissions and military spending. It is the military spending that is enabling these emissions. Yeah. And so for me now, and I gave 3, we had 2 official side events and another side event that we organized. It was all about communicating to everybody, to delegates, to activists, to the media, that this is what we need to understand, is this correlation. And this is the way to bring military spending to the fore, because that's the thing that comes first. And so we had, it was quite important for me that we were able to bring Nita Crawford into this whole COP conversation thing. So we made sure that Nita was there, and she was on the first official side event that we did. As a result of that, there was quite a lengthy article got picked up in the Atlantic, because primarily on emissions, and from that side event, and I can come on to the media, but there was some very good media that we got from that official side event. So, and at that side event, there was a very, very strong, wide, strong range of women. I think we had 7 women on that panel. The second event that we organized was a session around military spending and loss and damage. Again, I had Nita there, Lindsay Fielder-Cook. I don't know if Charlotte is on this call. Lindsay Fielder-Cook, Catherine from Wilf, myself, and Tasneem Essop, who's from the Climate Action Network International. And that was really just to raise, I think, possibly, for the first time in a proper kind of form and environment, can we please start looking at military spending as a legitimate source to tap for climate finance? Can it come in? Can we bring it in? And that was interesting, because at that session in the audience, and and bear in mind, Gaza is everywhere at COP. Yeah, so people are understanding. They're understanding. A number of the Climate Action Network Africa delegates really picked up on this session. So they were tweeting, they were broadcasting live from that event, which I mean, for myself, coming from an international development, structural campaigning, trade tax background, I have always kind of been looking to places in sub-Saharan Africa where we could be looking for allies on this, and it's a difficult one because it's not a priority topic. But Gaza has definitely lit a fire under a lot of people, and it was the CAN International, the Africa CAN coordinator, who was the woman that pushed for something that happens every day at COP, and it is this award which is fossil. Oh my God. Fossil, it's not dinosaur of the day. It's basically who's the bad guy that day at COP, and we worked with them to and provided them some information to get Israel as the bad cop of the day on, I can't remember which day it was. So the final event that we were involved, that I was speaking on, was the QNO event, which I think was outstanding. I mean, a number of people stood up and said, this is the event of COP so far for us. Of course, you've got people in the room who are interested in this. You have a lot of people in the room who are coming new. And this is the good thing about COP, is you're drawing in new people all the time. And that's partly because of the external agenda. It's Ukraine, or it's Gaza. So people will see, that's an interesting panel. Emissions of, let me just see what I have to say. Lindsay Fielder Cook's event was an outstanding event, I think, just because of the range of people there. And that event was a broader kind of, let's take a step back and look at what it looks like to shift money and power if we are to get proper transformational climate change. And she had some outstanding, hello, Stuart. She had some outstanding, Harjeet Singh, who was the global policy. I'm just talking about the QNO side event, Stuart, which was an official side event at COP, which was on shifting money and power. She had Harjeet Singh, who is the global policy guy for the Climate Action International, and he leads on loss and damage. I mean, she had a young guy who is the Barbadian youth ambassador to the UN, so he will be working with Mia Motley. There was a guy called Olaf Curry, who's, I think, at Leeds University. He was an IPCC contributor. Everybody was covering. So Harjeet was talking about inequality. The Taria, who was from Barbados, was speaking to the whole youth dimension. I was there to speak to the military. So it was really, what Lindsay was able to do was to put military spending, the power of the military, so I spoke to the role of the military, the role of the military in economy, emissions, this whole correlation. That was a wonderful event to be able to contribute the military dimension to. Then over and above that, there was the Ukraine government again went back and had another side event, an official side event. Again, much the same as was Sharm el Sheikh, which is to say, but they worked with a researcher there called Leonard de Klerk. Leonard was, I think, I mean, Stuart can correct me, but I think was the first person to sort of sit down and try and quantify the carbon fallout of, in the first instance, the first 8 months of Russia's invasion. That was for Sharm el Sheikh. So from February to November of the year before last, Leonard produced a report. Ukraine presented that. They came back again, Dubai, to present more updated numbers. And they had a session, which I didn't go to because there was another event happening, which was an IPCC event, which I went to hear where the IPCC were. But I didn't go to that one, but I'm sure that was well attended. And there, as I say, there were a number of other events. So that's the kind of first thing is the issue was really, really well covered. Now the media, because I think, let me just get my notes here. One second, I don't know what that's about. So there were the events. The primary piece of work that we were at, a tipping point that we were at COP with, was a report that we wrote, and Kochi, who works with me, did the kind of the research on, which was this NATO report. So last year for Sharm el Sheikh, we produced a report called Climate Collateral, and that was looking broadly at again, there's this correlation of military spending to military missions and the role of the global military in that. So we went to Sharm el Sheikh with, amongst other things, that report. This NATO report, which came out in, actually it was just we rescheduled it. It came out just after October the 7th. Was looking specifically at NATO. And the impact of this 2% of GDP to be spent on military spending that NATO are calling their 31 members to meet. So the report was on that, and so the media generally for the side events, I would say got pretty good coverage in terms of the reach. The report, coupled with that, meant that The Guardian covered it. Democracy Now! Covered it, the report specifically. We got coverage in from the Indian press, Arab press. I can't. There's a lot of it. There's a link to it on our COP roundup. And the interesting thing about the Guardian coverage that was picked up was they zoned in on something that was from the Climate Collateral report, which is this thing that we have, which is this 5% military spending. I mean, we have a two-part 5% military spending proposal. And then what seemed to happen once the Guardian piece had gone out, talking about this 5% element of the Climate Collateral report, was the 5% got spoken about. I think people just saw it in 2 or 3 different arenas inside COP, including the woman that leads on, I think it's Education for All at the UN. I'll come back to that. And so what happens at COP is there is this, and the reason our NATO report and the 5% got picked up was it got picked up by the key news agency that sits inside COP that disseminates everything to all journalists at COP on that day. So there's a whole sort of microclimate, a whole kind of, because everybody's there. If you're able to penetrate with media at COP, you can get a very kind of wide dissemination. And so from our point of view, we were over the moon with the pickup on that NATO report, including this live interview from COP with Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! So, you know, that was, so media is a, if you can find ways of capturing media at COP, it's a kind of, you know, one hit, and you capture a lot of people in one place. Kind of general observations about COP. It's, you know, it's no surprise it can be a pretty depressing experience. Because you have the work that's going on, you have everybody that's there, you have governments, negotiators, as I say, activists, media, the kind of people that in a sense you need to be there. But then you have this whole other commercial expo, absolute insane madness of everybody wanting to be there. So you have these huge pavilions, totally unnecessary. You have corporate pavilions, totally. You have, and as you know, there was more kind of fossil fuel lobbyists there, no surprise, than ever before. And COP at Dubai this year, if you think that Glasgow, I wasn't at Glasgow, I think Glasgow was 25,000 people. Egypt was 35,000 people. Dubai, they say, was 70,000 plus people. So generally speaking, something has to give with COP. You know, this is why the boycotting and is a very useful, but you know, we need more than activists to boycott COP for COP to change. But COP just feels like a totally broken, in terms of this wider madness, a totally broken thing. But I would say on this issue, it is absolutely a critical platform to be on. And I mean, I can pick up on a few bits and sort of wrap up, but you know, one of the key things that we were calling for, have been calling for, which, you know, 3 years ago seemed like an absolutely ridiculous thing to be calling for, but we thought, well, we could call for it anyway. Why the hell not? Was an IPCC special report into the role of the global military on climate change. And this is all before Ukraine and Gaza. And I keep saying it, Ukraine and Gaza have absolutely changed the necessary willingness of people with ears to hear and to listen and to realize that there is growing pressure on this topic. At this last COP, at the IPCC, so there was the meeting that was happening at the same time as the Ukraine side event. Actually, there was Jim Skier, who's the new chair of the IPCC, and his team were there, and everybody piled into the room, and the people that piled into the room were there to hear about the next cycle of the IPCC. So we've just finished a cycle, we're starting another cycle. It's a 5-year cycle. One of the elements of each of these cycles is this idea of a special report that allows science to dive deep into a topic. Okay, now there was always going to be, for this next cycle, a special report on cities and climate change, and there's so many calls for other special reports. At this meeting at Sharm in Dubai, I was there. They were talking about AR7. The room was full of, I would say, well, people that are engaged with the process, either directly or indirectly. I mean, a lot of people writing notes, people there who wanted to know what the IPCC was up to. And when the Q&A came up, I thought, okay, I'm going to ask about military missions. So I put my hand up, people put their hands up. And the first hand they picked was a hand from the front. And it was Tamara Lorenz from Wilf, who is absolutely genius at these events. Tamara, I think she's a goddess. I think she is so single-minded and focused. She put her hand up straight. She's sitting in the front, almost in front of them. And they asked her, I could only see that from the back, the head. And I hear this question about, we need a special report on military missions. And she said her piece. And when she sat down, now I think this is highly unusual, the audience applauded. Yeah. And what that told me was, whether it was Ukraine or Gaza or both, those people in that room were hearing what she was saying. Now, the IPCC just met in Istanbul to sit and plan their next 5-year strategy. And one of the things that we had been lobbying for was the special report on military missions, which we knew we wouldn't get, but we had to be asking. Ukraine inserted conflict as part of its proposal for a special report into a special report on what they call tipping points. So those tipping points include earthquakes, climate change related disasters, earthquakes, collapse of Antarctica, that kind of thing, massive climatic events, massive events that have impact on climate change. They inserted conflict and military missions into that tipping point call, which was a big step forward. Yeah, so now military missions was there, one of their requests. Every country can throw in ideas for special reports. At the end of this IPCC meeting, it's just finished, 17th, 18th of January in Turkey, from what I gather, the tipping points report, there was also a call for a loss and damage special report. The loss and damage and the tipping points report, not specifically military missions, but it was in there, were the two that garnered the most interest. But I believe there was a decision not to go with another special report. Yeah. So we have not it's military emissions or conflict emissions, military emissions in conflict are, you know, they're not on any IPC agenda. However, as this process evolves, you know, I hear things like, well, it could be a chapter, you know, military emissions could be a chapter in a report. You know, there's more. I don't think we should be giving up on that. And we always knew it was a long, hard slog. I'll end there. I'll end by saying that I think we've come an awful long way in a relatively short space of time, from Glasgow to now, if we're talking about COP and the intervening period. And Stuart is here. There's been so much more research put out there. The 5.5% of global military emissions is just like, you know, the air we breathe now in terms of the stat on military emissions, and it is everywhere. So now I think the task is to sort of, you know, take that, as I say, and just keep banging on about this positive correlation between emissions and spending, because it's the spending that drives the emissions.